I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight, we're going to start by going back in time, back to the days of protests and riots in Portland, back to the year 2020. It was a time the Portland Police Bureau used a lot of tear gas as they tried to gain control. And tear gas, if you don't know, is not pleasant, and it's not supposed to be. I've been hit by tear gas more than once. It's supposed to make you want to really get out of there, and I certainly did. But did Portland police go overboard? That's the big question, and that's our big story tonight. Let's begin by mentally traveling back to the spring and summer of 2020. In May of that year, George Floyd had been murdered by a police officer, and his death set off months of outrage around the country and on the streets of downtown Portland. Many people turned out and marched peacefully, but many others did not. It was a summer of struggle between protesters and law enforcement. Let's zero in on one night in particular, June 2nd, 2020. It was the sixth night of protests that summer, and it was a night when things really started to get heated between protesters and Portland police. Here's part of our coverage from that night.
Just after 9 o'clock, there was a skirmish between police and a splinter group of protesters. It appears police used tear gas and flashbangs to disperse the rowdy crowd.
The night started out with a peaceful demonstration, but as you saw, fighting between protesters and law enforcement got more intense as the night went on. We covered it on The Story the next day. At one point, around midnight, this happened.
And again, we've been watching police basically follow protesters who have sort of scattered throughout the city. We can only assume this is going to continue for a while. But, oh wow. That was the multiple police cruisers just driving through that intersection. Allison, producer, is this live? You guys know what's happening? This is live.
Yeah, looked a little close to some of those people down there.
Yeah.
The clashes between protesters and police continued for much of the night. Of course, you know it was the first of many that happened that summer.
Our photographer in Sky 8 did see people pushing back against the fencing, and we definitely saw fireworks going off. We also saw police using tear gas and flashbang type devices. Now keep in mind, this started a couple blocks from Pioneer Square where thousands of people were still having their peaceful rally.
Portland police used flashbangs, and at one point they even started spray painting protesters' cars to try and track people down later. And they used tear gas against the protesters, a lot of tear gas. Now we're getting an idea of just how much they used. A new study from a group called Forensic Architecture modeled how much tear gas they estimated was deployed throughout the night in Portland on June 2nd, 2020. Forensic Architecture is a research agency based in London. They typically look into cases of war crimes and human rights violations around the world. For instance, right now they're also investigating Russian airstrikes in Ukraine and allegations of abuse in Jerusalem. But they're also looking into the way tear gas is used in Portland. And what they found was that Portland police deployed so much tear gas that the concentration of gas that night in the air was thousands of times higher than established safe levels. The researchers used videos from social media and news reports from the night and reports from people on the ground, along with public records, to create a simulation of where tear gas was deployed throughout the city and when. They went to measure the concentration and the spread of the gas throughout the night. Here's some of the video they published in their study. This is a look at how they sorted through the data.
With weapons experts from the Omega Research Foundation, we identified different discharge and explosion patterns in videos from June 2nd. These patterns allowed us to assign each munition to a munition type, rule out those which likely didn't carry any chemical agents, and estimate the minimum quantities of CS and OC in each munition type.
Then they took that information and modeled out how much gas would have been present throughout the city. They say they found at least 138 chemical munitions used across 25 blocks over the course of about 3.5 hours. They also simulated the weather conditions from that day to see how the gas would have spread through the air. Here's what they found on that.
Concentrations of CS reached up to 67 milligrams per meter cubed. The Federal Health and Safety Administration considers that 2 milligrams per meter cubed is immediately dangerous to life or health, a threshold known to the PPB according to their own documents.
They say in some locations the concentration was far above those established safe levels for a total of 73 minutes.
We measured airborne concentrations in a further 15 locations across downtown Portland. These included locations within the protest area, but also others, hundreds of meters away. The 2 milligram threshold was exceeded in every location. In many locations, concentrations were recorded above 100 milligrams per meter cubed. The highest recorded concentration was 4,500 milligrams per meter cubed, more than 2,000 times the limit considered life-threatening.
They say the tear gas then washed into the Willamette River, threatening marine life and farmland downriver. However, Portland's Bureau of Environmental Services later took a look at the city's stormwater and sediment downtown. They did find elevated levels of the chemicals from the tear gas in the storm drains, but they say those levels dropped by the time they reached the river. As for the effects on humans, well, that's another story. Adverse health conditions were recorded that summer, both in people who attended protests, but also in bystanders, people who had nothing to do with the protests or the riots, but happened to be living or working nearby when Portland police used tear gas. Here's some of what we heard throughout the summer.
My cycle would get much heavier. I would bleed profusely. The pain was extreme, and I would get really bad headaches, which was something I didn't really get before.
It felt as if someone was giving you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and they were blowing actually toxins into your lungs. It was that severe and that direct, and it has a burning sensation like never before.
I have many accounts of people being hurt around me, people doubling over in pain, throwing up. It is mentally traumatizing because I'm going places I can't not look over my shoulder, and when stuff hits the ground, I jump.
Researchers at Kaiser Permanente's Center for Health Research in Portland have been studying the effects of tear gas exposure on people in Portland. In 2021, Kaiser surveyed more than 2,000 people about what tear gas had done to them. It's the largest tear gas study of its kind. 94% of the people reported adverse health effects. We asked the lead researcher about what they found.
So what our research showed was that, for people after they were exposed to tear gas, even when they left the vicinity and, walked away, they were not having dissipation of those health impacts right away. So they were having burning eyes, itchy eyes, itchy skin, coughing, nausea, kind of in the immediate. But these symptoms were lasting for them through days and even into weeks, where people were having gastrointestinal issues, lots of nausea. There were people that were having prolonged headaches, people that were continuing to have breathing issues, people reporting, eye issues, dizziness, insomnia. So kind of a wide range across physiological symptoms. And then, of course, we had people reporting that they were having changes in their menstrual function. And that was a little bit of even longer term.
That directly contradicts what Portland police told us about tear gas at the time.
Which is a substance that if you walk out of it, you really stop feeling the effects almost right away. And you'll have some residual effects that at least I've encountered all the times I've been exposed to it, where I might get a little bit of an aftertaste, but you're functional a lot faster and you suffer a lot less long.
The researchers at Kaiser say the new study corroborates what people were reporting about the health impacts after being exposed to tear gas.
We did know that people were exposed, and we asked people to report on the number of days that they were exposed, but we had no way of establishing what types of concentrations they would have been exposed to. And we were also limited at that time, not even understanding which exact chemical agents they were exposed to. So really what this study is showing us is kind of that range and what the exposure is, and ultimately showing that based on OSHA standards, the concentrations that were being deployed in this scenario well exceed what would be considered a safe use, and that in fact that these levels, these concentrations are known to cause health issues for people.
We asked Portland police about the new study. They said they're still dealing with pending litigation, and so they're not going to comment. Just a few days after the night in the study, protesters sued because of the tear gas use and the effects. A judge barred Portland Police Bureau from using tear gas except for instances in which a person's life or safety is at risk. The judge found that Portland police were using the gas against peaceful protesters. And months later, the judge found the police were violating that order, and the city settled eventually with protesters, paying them $250,000. So, what do you think about this new report? I know the state of downtown Portland during the summer of 2020 brings up all sorts of emotions for people across the Pacific Northwest. Share your thoughts, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story, the state of Washington poised to become the 10th in the country to ban the sale of assault weapons. A bill is now waiting for the governor's signature.
I want to get away from the state so badly. I cannot stand it. The politics have just driven me away.
It's a huge victory.
We'll break down the specifics of the soon-to-be law, as well as update you on where Measure 114 stands here in the state of Oregon, when The Story returns.
To the state of Washington now, where a bill to ban the sale, manufacture, and import of assault weapons has passed the legislature and soon is going to be signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee. It's called House Bill 1240. The ban comes after years of failed attempts at similar legislation in Olympia. It will make Washington the 10th state in the nation to have such a ban. There is one small temporary loophole that you should be aware of. The Washington Senate added an amendment that allows gun manufacturers in the state of Washington to sell the assault weapons that they had in stock before this year. But they only have 90 days to do that after Inslee signs the bill, and they have to sell to people living outside the state of Washington. So thanks, Washington lawmakers. Now maybe those are all coming to Oregon? I don't know. Otherwise, the bill does not ban the possession of assault weapons for folks who already own them in Washington state. And there are exceptions when it comes to law enforcement, military service members, and inheriting an assault weapon that's already in the family. The bill bans more than 50 gun models, including things like AR-15s and AK-47s, and it should come as no surprise that gun advocates argue the ban violates the Second Amendment and have promised lawsuits to challenge the upcoming law. Republican Senator Linda Wilson of Vancouver already has said HB 1240 clearly violates our state and federal constitutions, which is why it will end up in court immediately. Because the bill applies to all future sales of assault weapons, customers are rushing to make their purchases now before the law goes into effect, and that's going to happen the moment Inslee signs the bill.
Everybody's trying to get in last minute. We're receiving orders from out of state, people shipping in, and people trying to get their paperwork in prior to this going into effect.
It's not immediately clear when Inslee is going to sign the bill. After it passes the legislature, the time it takes to get the governor's signature often ranges from a few days to a few weeks. But you can be sure Inslee will have quite the ceremonial bill signing whenever it does happen. And that brings us to Oregon's Measure 114. Remember that? The gun control measure the voters passed narrowly back in November. It was a thin majority, but still a majority. 114 is not focused on assault weapons, but it is focused on creating a permitting process in order to buy a gun, and it also restricts the use of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammo. The measure has been on hold for months. A state judge in Harney County wants the constitutionality of each part of the measure hashed out in court first. Here's a timeline for where the case stands. Both the plaintiffs and the state have made several filings, we're told, since the last hearing on March 3rd. And no decision has been made and will be made on those filings until the next hearing on June 16th. Right now, the full trial, which is sure to be closely watched if it does happen, is set for mid-September. Still to come on the story. When you think about pirate ships or massive seafaring vessels from centuries long ago, well, they share a common need, right? The wind in order to move. And in order to take advantage of that wind, you need a good sail. Most sails are created by machines nowadays, but that's not the case for one family in the state of Washington who have mastered the art of hand sewing those massive sails. We'll show you how it's done during this Good Energy Week when the story returns.
Straight ahead at 6:30, neighbors react after a long vacant bar burns down, why they and firefighters say they're not surprised. Also, new video shows an Oregon State Trooper responding to a man with a gun along I-5, why a grand jury found the fatal shooting recording by dashcam video justified. Plus, where you might get a triage nurse instead of an ambulance the next time you call 911. That is next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
Our Good Energy Week coverage continues tonight, leading up to Earth Day on Saturday. I hope you're doing something to commemorate that. Tonight we're getting an up-close look at a craft that few people in the world have mastered. It's the craft used for centuries that's mostly been replaced by machines. Sewing sails for massive ships. One family along Marrowstone Island in Washington has not only perfected the craft, they've built a life around it. Leah Pizzetti from our sister station in Seattle has our story.
This family business was built on history. And today, even in this modern world, its focus is still on preserving that history. You have to go far to escape the noise of the city. And if you go far enough, you'll find a small loft tucked away in the woods on a remote island. A powerhouse that on the inside is like stepping back in time.
This is a dying craft. You know, not many people know how to do these things anymore.
Naja Chimenti sits at the helm of her family's niche business.
To the layman, someone who doesn't know anything about the sea and ships, I'll say, we make sails for pirate ships, because that brings up the right visual, right?
Massive sails for historic ships, sewn all by hand.
Most modern sailmakers would put in a stainless steel hydraulically pressed grommet right here. And I'm sewing in a hand-sewn eyelet.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of hand-sewn stitches for sails that propel huge ships around the world. An art that she personalizes for each vessel depending on what era it's from, with incredible precision required.
There's also a lot of physical intelligence of how to handle the needle and the palm, how to push that needle through 10 to 13 layers of fabric in the corners. It's not necessarily a question of strength, it's a question of knowing the tricks and the tips.
This is second nature to Naja.
I grew up in the sail loft, I grew up on the ships, climbing the rigging.
Her parents met in the sailing world, then started this business near Port Townsend, so she grew up on the sea.
It has to be a left-handed palm.
Well, I used a right-handed palm before.
And Naja now runs Force 10, bringing in apprentices to also learn the craft.
This is your problem right here.
Not only is this a historic field, it's historically male-dominated. But she says now more women are learning the craft, and she's proud to take over her family's trade.
And something I love about it also as a woman is that I don't have people coming in here. A lot of my apprentices are men, young men, old men, but they never question my knowledge. They never question my skill. They just come in and say, oh wow, you're doing beautiful work. I would love to learn this beautiful work.
Teaching them the importance of precision, hand-sewing stitches that will be able to withstand the strongest winds.
It is a very powerful feeling, as you say, to know that you can make something with your hands that can take so much load, that can drive so much power. These ships weigh thousands and thousands of pounds, and these sails can drive them alone, and that's pretty marvelous. Yeah.
In a world of new technologies, noise, and of change, she is holding on to the past, keeping history alive.
There is a value in the work to be done, not just finding a quicker, easier way to do it, but learning to do it well yourself.
Leah Pizzetti.
And that's one of the reasons I love handcrafts.
King 5 News.
Oh, I love that. The artistry and the precision, it's gorgeous. Up next on The Story, you had plenty to say about Governor Kotek's first 100 days in office following our segment last night. We're going to feature some of your thoughts as well as some of your criticism of our coverage when The Story returns. Well, Wednesday marked 100 days in office for Oregon Governor Tina Kotek. We spent the first chunk of our show yesterday breaking down some of her accomplishments already. She's been busy, as well as looking ahead to her remaining priorities with lawmakers still since the session is going on in Salem. At the end of our segment, we asked for your thoughts on Kotek's job performance so far. Here's a sampling of how you feel.
You asked. I don't think she's doing a good job as governor. I don't think she's out there talking to the people and listening to what we want. Hopefully, that'll change.
And John says, is Tina Kotek doing a good job solving problems? No. None of the problems that have been brought up are being addressed at the root cause. Until they are addressed at the root, what they are doing will waste money and make the problem worse. The majority of your comments were in favor of what Kotek has done so far, with a viewer named David reminding us of a few other things that she's done in her first 100 days. Governor Kotek also stopped reimbursing travel for out-of-state employees, a huge plus in my book, and she revamped the OLCC board over the Bourbon Gate problem. All additional good accomplishments by our hands-on new governor.
I am very impressed with Tina Kotek. It is really great to see a leader who steps up and speaks out as she has been doing. I think she's going to be a great, great, great governor. She's certainly hitting on all the right spots for what Oregon needs. I am a true supporter of her.
I have really been impressed with the governor and her approach so far. She seems very direct, and she's calling agencies and other people of office to be accountable and responsible. And I personally think it's a breath of fresh air.
Joanne even told us, I did not vote for her, but I already like her, and I think she will be an excellent governor. Another thing that makes our show different from your typical newscast, we're not afraid to feature your criticisms of our coverage. We think there's value in letting you sound off on things you don't like.
Give her a chance, get to know her, and you're very biased, so knock it off, or some of us aren't going to watch the station anymore, or the story. Really, very negative for no reason at all. Give the woman a chance.
I got to tell you, I actually thought our coverage yesterday was quite positive for the governor. In fact, it was so positive it prompted me to add a disclaimer at the beginning that I'm not on anyone's team, just simply trying to cut through the noise to bring you the facts and issues that affect all of us. I think some of the negativity that you noticed in our story yesterday was near the end when we mentioned a study showing that governor has the lowest approval rating of all the governors in the country. Suzanne told us, please don't slam our governor. She was elected fairly. And for you to claim she is the most unpopular governor in the country is catty and unprofessional. Stay unbiased, please. Okay, Suzanne, well, listen, that was not me being catty and just claiming that with nothing to back it up. It came from this survey that the governor was asked about by another reporter during her press conference yesterday. The survey was done by a research technology company called Morning Consult. Their poll was done between the beginning of the year and the end of March, quote, among representative samples of registered voters in each state. And Kotek comes in last with the lowest approval rating. And I reported that as meaning least popular, which in my opinion is fair. I wanted to add that to our segment yesterday to highlight the governor's response, which I thought was great. She basically said a lot of Oregonians don't know her yet, and she hopes that as time goes on, that will change and they'll appreciate what she's doing. Thanks for each of you for sharing your thoughts with us. I appreciate it. It's one of the many things that I think makes our show unique. And speaking of our show, look at that. We're all out of time. Thanks for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you.